All right. Hey guys, I'm Khalil,
Hey, I'm Chad.
and we are the Marshals of Truth. All right, so this is our first episode here, and if anyone that's seen our intro would know, we're just here to talk about things that are on our mind, mostly about philosophy and politics and like big overarching concepts that we don't really hear a lot about, like political theory and stuff like that, understanding why things the way that they are. Um, and for our first entry today, we wanted to talk about truth, like the idea of truth and why it's important in our world.
Yeah, because when you look at politics, you can't have politics without truth. We've seen over the years have things been polarized and things just gotten worse and worse. People don't seem to be valuing the truth that very much. You tend to wonder where it is. I mean, we've heard of the phenomenons of fake news, misinformation, all that kind of stuff. And you have to wonder once again, where's the truth in all that? And sometimes people just don't care. And so we wanted to kind of talk about this topic and give our kind of thoughts on it.
Yeah. So to begin, fake news, the name that is so common to many of us that are Americans, um, coined by Trump, popularly a few years ago. When it comes to the concept of truth and like talking about it, you got to wonder, like, for example, what is fake? You know, because if Trump's going to say and others like him that a lot of news outlets that he doesn't agree with say things that he calls fake news, you
Hmm.
have to wonder what is fake. You have to know
Yep,
the truth to know that.
yep. I remember back in 2017, just as the inauguration was happened, one of the first big controversies of their administration was over the crowd size. Um, you had images talking about comparing it to Obama's and previous presidents, and it was very obvious that they did not have the same crowd size as previous presidents. And yet, when Sean Spicer went up to the podium, he said that they had the biggest crowd ever, period. And him, the president, going forward, they would call any kind of thing going against that fake news.
Yeah, they would say that again, that it was the biggest crowd at any inauguration in America before him, when clearly looking at drone footage and photos, it just wasn't that big. And if you counted them, I think it was maybe 800,000, less than a million,
Yeah,
when compared to, I don't know, 1.5 or 2 million for just Obama's inauguration. So it's not that hard to figure out that he was lying. But when confronted with these facts, um, I don't know who it was. Maybe it was Conway. It might have been Spicer.
yeah,
Maybe McEnany. Someone up in the administration said that um, they coined the term alternative fact. I think it was.
yep.
Yeah,
They
and
use
that's
that.
like the first sign of the Trump administration like becoming a very dangerous force.
Yeah. Alternative facts. That's basically saying that there's some other sort of reality that's just as true as one's reality, which, from an objective point of view, doesn't really make sense. When it came to the whole crowd kind of thing, that's basically saying that our view of our crowd being the largest one that had ever been seen is our truth, and your truth, which is apparently fake, of that crowd being this not. I don't believe it was any the smallest, but it was definitely not the largest. That kind of truth that you have is just an alternative to our kind of point of view. It's basically saying that we both have these truths which are true, however, they're just on the same level. It doesn't really make any sense. If you look at which you would have to ask, well, which one is more correct? If you ask them, ours is just another version of that. What does that mean? Is it true? Is it not? Is it correct? Um, which one is the closest to being correct? And you would look at the side, you would look at evidence, and you would see that one side was a little more true or a little more correct, a little more related to the objective viewing reality of, not having a big crowd size. And you'd say, yeah, okay, that side's a little more true. And yet by saying, this is just our alternative facts, that's meaning in trying to put that at the same level as a demonstrably more true statement, it's just devaluing that there is a truth, that there is something you can measure up to and get close to, and your correctness to reality. It just kind of devalues that.
Yeah, that's the thing about like particularly the Trump administration, like as it's really almost personal for a lot of Americans. But this goes for all around the world,
Oh yeah.
fictional or non-fictional. But back to Trump, the most dangerous thing, the biggest crime made, he ever did, was to make truth an opinion. That's the thing, because if you think hard, it really makes no sense. I don't care like if it works in your favor to believe this or it doesn't. It makes no sense to think that there is a such thing as your truth or their truth. No, there is only the truth, but what you think is your truth is really just your opinion. It's not the truth. Your opinion can be wrong.
Mhm. We
And when
each
you
have our
refuse
own
to believe
opinions.
that, when you refuse to believe that, you don't even know how far that can go.
Because if you're saying you're just about as right as everyone else, and that there's no objectively, demonstrably kind of real thing, what do you kind of be? If something bad happens and you need to say what is true, what can you say? My side has our point of view, they have another point of view. I don't know. They both are both true, they say. And so you can't really measure against that. And so if you have an actor or a president or a leader or something to that sort who makes whatever statements that they want, and you don't really have anything to say to go against it, because in their point of view, there is not really a truth. There's just what their truth is and what your truth is and what the next person's truth is. You can't really check them on that because they'd just be able to say, that's just your point of view.
Because in an argument, it is possible for two people to say the truth. It's just that it's only possible for them to be not exactly on the same topic. Because if one person says, I'm trying to think of an example. I don't know if I need to, but like one person says like the truth on a particular thing and another person says the truth on another particular thing. Point is that it's it's possible for two people in an argument to both say the truth. It's just that if both of them were to say the truth on the same topic, then they would both kind of agree with each other, you know. So when it comes to politics, like the idea that one person can say something, and that's true, and another person can say something, and then that's also true. Um, it really just calls into question um, like when the honest person lies and the liar tells the truth. You know, because like I just thought of this quote a little while ago. Like I don't think anyone actually said it. I think I just came up with it myself. But like when the honest person lies and the liar tells the truth, the people lose trust. But it's only when the liar lies while saying they're telling the truth that there is no such thing as fact. And that's to mean that it is possible for a reputable source that people largely believe to be the closest to like objective truth, like with no bias, no objective, like no subjective opinion, to lie. And that does happen. But it's really dangerous when that honest person lies, while at the same time the liar that's known to be a liar tells the truth once, because it calls into question like the it calls into question who's telling the truth and who represents truth. Because
Hmm.
public, and let's just say like the honest person being like a public figure and the liar also being a public figure, like the people, they wonder who's the truth, who's telling the truth here.
Yeah.
Um, but then when the liar lies, continues to lie, um, goes back to their regular rhythm of lying, while saying they're telling the truth, then it really begins to create apathy amongst the public of like, oh, well, the truth doesn't matter.
Yeah. You'd think that it wouldn't matter because, you're not really sure what's true. So the reputable source, let's say it's the Associated Press, they put out a report, turns out it was false. Okay? People wouldn't, if you were just a normal person reading that, you wouldn't really you might not trust them as much as you would. And then say, random guy down the street, your neighbor over there says that report, or he has another report, and that turns out to be true. Hmm, maybe this guy, he knows what he's talking about. And so you go following him. And then if say neighbor guy down the street goes back to, he was actually a liar. He goes back to his lying. You might follow that guy who keeps lying and believing that is the truth. Or you just might get disillusioned. The person I trusted for so long, that the Associated Press or whatever news source, whatever public figure, or just person who might have lied to you, you hear them and you heard that they make a lie. I don't know if I could really trust them, but this person over there said something true, and maybe it turns out that the next thing they said was false. You would start to wonder, I don't really know what is true. I trusted someone, then they told a lie. I didn't trust them, they told the truth. Where do I supposed to go like that? And if for some reason a lot of people would go with that and say, I don't really care. You know, I'm not really sure what is true anymore. I can't really find it. The people I trusted to give it to me aren't really I can't really depend on them. So whatever goes, goes. And that's a really, really dangerous thing when it comes to politics.
Because if you think that the truth doesn't matter, like you cease to care. And honestly, like Chad, I think we both understand, just how many people that we know, only we know, just everyone here listening to this, like think for a second. Think about how many people you know, like including maybe even yourself, where you don't care what the truth is. It could start minor. It
Yeah.
could start with something that doesn't really matter all too much. Like
I just think of
like
like you're in a classroom. I mean, we've talked about it. We just graduated high school, so high school is still kind of fresh of our minds. How so many classes we'd be in a class, people would talk about whatever book it is, and you could tell that they didn't really care about what they were saying, And to be honest, I've probably done it too. I mean, classes can get like that. But when you get around talking to a topic, and like I said, you could just tell when people don't really care what's the truth about what happened in the book even. They're just kind of saying to what to say. It's just not caring.
right, and that's like on a micro level,
Yeah.
but like even like when you start like getting used to the idea of the truth not mattering, like not like it not being important, then you tend to follow that trend when it is important. Like when you're talking about politics, an election cycle is coming around, it's about your time to vote, and you're thinking really hard about which candidate to vote for. What if one candidate is known for lying? um, but you like the lie.
Yeah.
You like what they have to say, even if it's a lie. Um, and what tends to happen with those people is that they set the seeds for demagogues and populists because I don't know exactly what many conservative Trump voters were thinking back in 2015, 2016. But I don't know if they expected Trump to be as bad as he is. And the fact that they still don't believe he's as bad as he actually is now is really scary. It means that Trump was really good at his job. But like that first little lapse of judgment, that little lapse of care, of belief in truth, is really scary.
Yeah. I
Like,
mean, with populists, with Trump, as we said, it all goes back to people saying what you want to hear. If to you the truth is not really as important, it's just important, how is it gonna affect, how is something gonna affect me? How does it make sense for me? Does it even matter? Say someone comes around and they say something that, you agree with. It may or may not be true. Maybe you don't know, but it's something you agree with, so you're gonna kind of follow along with that. That's what happens with fake news, with sensationalized news even. You'll get a story that may or may not be true. Maybe it's something that's just reported. It just came out and it's something that you agree with. Say you're a Democrat and you don't like um, some conservative Republican, and some reportedly comes out saying that they did something wrong, and it's just an early report. It might be true, it might not, but if it's something that you agree with, you're going to follow along with that, regardless if it's true. And even if it turns out that it wasn't true, you might still follow along with it because, maybe it was close enough. And so it all comes back to, it's when someone tells you what you want to hear, and that's what happens with like populists with Trump and Trump supporters. When you hear what you want to hear, you're just gonna follow along with that. And as long as you keep getting that kind of dosage of hearing what you want to hear, regardless of if it's true, you're just gonna keep going with it because it agrees with you, maybe makes you feel nice.
right. And the furthest extent of lies has to be the big lie. And hopefully everyone knows what that is, the rejection of the 2020 US presidential election results. Um, we tend to think of the time between November and January as being a time when like you can really look um, at what led to January 6th, or like the main like hotspot of the rejection of the results and the big lie. But it really started as early as I would say spring of 2020, like May. And Chad, like, I wonder, what do you remember about May 2020? Because I remember Trump was saying at some press conferences, like at the White House, saying something about how, like, you shouldn't, like, how it's likely that the results won't be true because of the postal service and the
Yeah,
ability of people falsifying results, like
yeah.
in their ballots, like as they sent them through mail.
Yeah, so with the pandemic just coming out, the United States shifted to having more mail-in voting as being a greater option because of the pandemic. People didn't want to go out to the poll stations, and people thought it would be, I mean, it's a safer option to mail in your vote than go in a polling station where you could catch a global virus. And so, in May, in April, it might have even been March, the question came up during press conferences of whether President Trump would accept the election results if he was to lose. And it was even back in May where he was kind of casting doubt on it. He was saying that if we win, we'll accept it, but if not, we'll have to look at it because he was casting doubt on the whole mail in system, on whether or not it could be fraudulent or not. And when it first came out, it was somewhat reasonable to have such suspicions. We hadn't done it at such a large scale, um, and the safety guards were just being put in place as to make it a safer election. And by the time the election happened in November, it was very safe, and we figured out there was not much fraud. There wasn't really any fraud at all. But in that early kind of context, there were some doubts that were being had, and they were working through those. But the president, he was presenting to everyone that if it turns out he didn't win, there might be something up with it because of the mail-in kind of system. And so even all the way back then, he was casting his doubt. And so when we got to the election in November, and it turned out that he wouldn't win, that it kind of became a whole self-fulfilled prophecy. He said that if he lost, it would be because it was fraudulent, and so he lost, and therefore, to him and his supporters, it was fraudulent. Around the time of the election, the weeks, the days after it, so many reports of fraudulent cases of everything from, markers being used and satellites hacking into the voting systems. So many of these different crazy different claims were being thrown out about whether or not the election was really legitimate or not. And
Yeah,
you keep going.
yeah. I mean, like it started off with a convenient, like a convenient fact, a convenient
Yeah,
truth was that majority of the people that would be doing this mail-in voting were going to be registered Democrats, likely to vote for Biden when the general election came. Um, People thought, like conservatives, those in the Trump administration and Trump himself, they thought that 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 it was likely that most of the votes that came in by mail were going to go in favor of Biden, and therefore weaken Trump's chance of victory. So while they were still legitimate votes, and that was confirmed by Chris Krebs very early on after the election, saying that it was the most secure election in America's history. There was still the idea that almost whatever votes that came in by mail were going to go for Democrat. And so, like any fact or any characteristic of the election process, like the fact that votes were continuing to be counted in Georgia in the middle of the night, um, that was very um, um, it was very skeptical. It was very it cast again a lot of doubt,
yeah,
to Trump because it sounded like to him that there were some people scheming, behind him in the middle of the night, counting votes that weren't there, for Biden. But again, it started with the convenient truth, and that was majority of the mail-in votes were going to be by Democrats.
yeah. And then casting doubt on the whole system itself, thinking that it could be manipulated, thinking that it could be fraudulent, came out of what originally was a small truth at the beginning, that when we had not tested mail-in voting on a national scale very well. I mean, we'd had it as a small system for elections going forward, but it was mainly done for absentees and for health reasons, but it hadn't been done on a national scale. And so people were honestly, at the beginning, it's skeptical about it because it hadn't been tested. But as we saw over the months leading up to the election and at the election date, more safeguards and measures were made to kind of make it safer. But the whole casting doubt on the whole election began, this whole big lie began with a little kernel of truth. The fact that more Democrats would be voting by vote by mail, and the fact that mail-in voting hadn't been done at a large scale and hadn't been tested. All of this big kind of conspiracy theory started with a small bit of truth and expanded upon it with various different lies and skepticisms and different theories, but it came out of that little piece of truth. And so everything after that, which usually became out to be lies or just fabrications, could be believed by someone who was believing, yeah, a lot of Democrats would be voting, and yes, we haven't tested it, so maybe that person would be a little skeptical. But that goes back to the quote that Khalil said, when the liar tells the truth just once and yet goes back to lying, it casts a lot of doubt on, what is really true. Because this, for the big lie, like you said, there were some true parts of it at the beginning. Yet so much afterwards, it was so many and so many lies going forward.
Right. Like looking back now, like just how crazy some of those lies were. There was something about like a dead South American president, like like hacking the system of the DNC to give them more votes than they had. It was something crazy. I'd have to look back at it, but there were so many different lies that were so hard to believe. But
Yeah,
yet, like some like Billy Bob in West Virginia or Kansas, and sorry for anyone named Billy Bob, in West Virginia or Kansas, but it was those sort of people that would think, oh, that sounds about right, because those people, they like they are represented in government by people that are trained to lie. I don't know why necessarily. Maybe it's just a grab for power. You know, they want money by lobbyists that will give them money to vote with which either way. But for whatever reason, like it seems to be the majority of Republican, and they're not only Republican, there are a lot of Democrat. Um, but government officials, they lie to their people a lot. You know, they take money from lobbyists and they use that for power. Um, but
Hmm.
that means that the people that they represent, wherever they're from, they're used to hearing lies, but they don't know they're lies. So they think it's the truth, you know. So
Isn't
whenever the truth comes, they say it's fake news. And when they say that they're told a lie, they believe it's true. So when they hear about that dead South American president, maybe it was like, I don't know, maybe it was like the Bolivian president, you know, like Chavez, or maybe they might have even have
I
used
have
Maduro
no
as
idea.
an example, but I don't know, it was something stupid. Like they said that those there was some crazy plot, international plot to take down Trump. Um,
Yeah,
but
hacking the Dominion voting systems and all kind of that.
Oh yeah, exactly. Like Giuliani was trying to sue the hell out of all of them, and he lost all but one case. It was crazy. There's really no real reason to believe that the election was stolen, given how many lies were told about it. Like if like
Yeah,
any rational person that looks carefully at the truth and hasn't yet been worn down by liars, um, they could pretty quickly tell, oh, this is bullshit.
yeah.
But
But
you know,
you
like
have that kind of large scale apathy, that kind of large scale, say, alternative facts, because the value of truth has kind of been worn down by liars. When you don't really know what is true, when people believe that they have their sort of truth, that they have their truth, and that there's other truths out there, that there are some sort of alternate version of the truth, and not that there's some objective truth, they're going to believe, what works with them. What's the most pragmatic thing that's going to go with, what statement or what kind of point of view works? How is it going to help me? And so you look at politicians and you look at politics, it's not about, so many times, it's not about telling what the truth is. It's sometimes just saying what will work. It's saying what will get votes. It's saying what people will believe or donate to our campaigns if we say it. It's gone away from kind of telling the truth and saying what is right, regardless of if it agrees with you or not. Because people are so much more apt to believing what kind of already agrees with them, what goes with their alternative truth or their belief system. And so politicians and people like that are just going to say what goes with that belief. And that point of view negates that there is an objective truth that needs to be told, that there is a true thing that people should be believing, and just kind of lets people believe what they want to believe, regardless of if it's completely fake or if it's the closest to a scientific fact as we could get.
right. Now, obviously, the first fact was that for whatever reason, I'm actually not 100%. Well, I guess we can assume, but I don't want to. Like the Republicans, they didn't want to do as much mail-in votes. Um, and they totally should have, they could have, because of the potentially deadly global virus that was being spread at the time, much more deadly than it is now. And um, and they went out in their lines, you know, and something like 70-80% of all voters that came in person were Republicans. So that left Democrats being the majority of those that came in for mail-in voting. I already said that. Um, and the what was most interesting, I'm trying to think of reasons as to why, like from March, April, May of 2020 to January of 2021, you know, like what things made it less likely that the election was stolen? What things made it more likely that Trump was lying? First, and this is one thing I just realized, the Trump didn't really try to strengthen the postal service. Like in fact, I'm pretty sure he only did things to weaken it over the course of 2020. I might be wrong, but he
The
certainly didn't.
states also did similar things. I
Exactly.
remember leading up to the election, states started restricting how many, say, mail-in drop-off boxes could be had in the state, because that was one of the concerns that, politicians and people were bringing up because they didn't trust initially the mail-in system. People were worried that when they had these kind of drop-off boxes of mail-in votes, people could tamper with them, that they could steal them or somehow hack into them or change the votes. And so you had states and I believe maybe even the federal government through funding, um, restricting how many places you could go and drop off your votes, how many places you could go do that, when they'd go collect them, when they were eligible or not. It was kind of a lot of weakening of that kind of system.
Right. So if he wanted a secure election, if he wanted there to be like less of to close to no doubt of the results of the election, get rid of that doubt that he was so worried about during the spring, then he would have strengthened the postal service, which so many people were going to use that fall when it came to the election. Because again, I don't think I need to remind you guys, like COVID was a very scary thing in 2020. Now people are still scared of it, but a lot of people now have had it, and some people consider the pandemic to be largely over. But anyway, back then it was a very scary thing, and a lot of people they decided, and even some Republicans, they decided, I'm not going to go in a line. That's just I could get COVID. I'm too scared of that. And so, like the postal service was going to be a resource, for so many Americans to send over their vote. But for whatever reason, at the same time when so many Republicans, including Trump, were questioning the potential results of the election, um, they just created that convenient alternative fact that that uh, um, that there would be tampering in the election when
Hmm.
they didn't do anything to strengthen the postal service. And so they created their own doubt because they
Yeah,
wanted to win anyway.
it
Not by
became a
good
self-fulfilling
intention,
prophecy.
but by tampering it themselves. And that's what I mean, I guess we can talk about this later. Like we can expand on this later, I guess, but like Trump was the one that tampered with the election before it even happened, by weakening the postal service. But he says that the Democrats were the ones that tampered with the election, that there was some international plot, so he actually accuses the other side of doing what he did. And that is like
Yeah,
and then like
because
when you do that, the truth is so hard to find because even if like someone like me right now 2 years ago could have said, wait a minute, you're actually the one doing it. And that's going to now seem so hard to believe because he was the one that was saying the Democrats were cheating. How could the Republicans be cheating when they said the Democrats were cheating? That would like that would
yeah,
be
you don't know what's true.
that
The
would be
whole
quite a stretch, and then it questions the truth,
hmm
like when the truth is so hard to believe that no one believes it because hey, why would they accuse someone else of doing what they're doing? Then why would they believe it? But it's so common. It's so common. They did that with Fred Hampton, anyone that's seen Judas and the Black Messiah. But it's so common. Like they accuse the other
hmm
side of doing what they're doing so that the truth is so hard to believe that no one believes it and no one cares.
yeah, and especially when it comes to big events like a national election or an assassination or a terrorist attack, people expect, when it comes to these kinds of, people expect a big explanation for a big event. There was a huge terrorist attack, and so there has to be a huge plot that it doesn't make sense that a couple terrorists could have planned it themselves. It had to be the government because it wouldn't have it. People want a big explanation for a big thing, and so when it comes out that the truth is as simple as as some terrorist groups or people hijacking a plane and flying it into a building, as opposed to a worldwide conspiracy to invade a country for oil, which is all set up by the government, and they did these planes and this, that, and the other. It just doesn't make sense. People don't always want because people don't always want to hear what is right because sometimes it just is so hard to believe. And that could be because it is so big, or it could be because it's something so small, something so tiny that just doesn't explain that huge event that you would just continue to doubt it. That's how a lot of these conspiracy theories work.
But then another big example, which is roughly around the same time, 1999, the apartment bombings in Russia. This was after the Chechen invasion of Dagestan, a southern province in Russia, bordering the then independent state of Chechnya. So Putin, then like the prime minister of Russia under the then president Boris Yeltsin, he wanted to gain power um, of the country, and it is believed that he used the FSB, the like their version of the FBI, like their secret
Internal
service,
intelligence.
yeah, their intelligence committee, which he was the leader of very recently at that time, um, to orchestrate apartment bombings that would kill hundreds of Russians and lead like Russian opinion um, against the Chechens to go take back that lost province. Um, and it worked. It worked, but there were very strong reasons to believe that Putin had actually orchestrated it himself. Like, for example, there were four actual bombings that occurred, and I believe it was the fifth one in the suburb of Moscow called Ryazan. Was the Ryazan incident, where in September of 1999, three FSB agents were found by the local police force setting up a bomb to be ignited, exploded under an apartment building in the city. And of course, as it works in Russia and in very many other countries in the world, the federal office just they had control over every aspect of the country. So the local police department didn't have the opportunity to spread that incident around the country to the point where people believed that Putin set it up or that the FSB set it up. They wanted to, the government wanted to set up the idea that it was terrorists, Chechen terrorists that set up that plot. But when you see three FSB agents setting up the bomb, you know, it really calls to question, wait a minute, did the government do this? And of course we could talk about the Vietnam War as another example, but then like the apartment bombings with Putin in 1999. I mean, would you agree with this, Chad, that it is an example of how like the truth is so hard to believe that no one believes it?
Yeah,
I mean, intellectuals were saying like that might have been true, and BBC journalists were saying, "Hey, it might have been set up by Putin. This is a little sketch." They were talking about the Ryazan incident, but no one, not a significant amount of people in Russia, believed that the government could have done it and did it, just as an excuse for Putin to reinvade, and reignite a war in Chechnya to take back the lost province. No one believed it. It was so hard to believe, but it was true. It's likely that Putin did set it up.
yeah. I mean, sometimes the truth is hard to hear. When it's something that conflicts with your own worldview, something that conflicts with sometimes your own truth or your whole how you think something happened, you're not gonna want to believe it, regardless of how many facts or evidence or things that were actually presented to discount it. If it's something that's so conflicting with how you feel or with how you view the world, um, regardless of if it's true or not, you're inclined not to believe it because it's something that feels like it's taking down on it's destroying part of how you view the world, how you view things, and sometimes that even feels like it's a personal attack. And so you're gonna shy away from that, and you're just gonna go back into how you believe. Um, and this is especially evident nowadays when you go online, when you go on um, those kind of circles, because especially now with how like websites such as Facebook or Twitter will curate your feed into giving things that are related to, what you like and what you retweet and what you interact with. If all you get is one kind of view that gets reaffirmed, and you get something from outside that goes against that, regardless of if it's true or not, you're gonna get shaken up about it. You might not believe it. It's something that goes against with how you feel and how you view the world, and that could be very frightening. But at the end of the day, if it's true, then it's true. And it's up to you to if you accept that. And that comes down to the fact of whether you value if it's true or not, or whether you just care if it's close enough. I remember one example, I believe it was a year ago, when Texas was having issues with their power grid due to a winter cold snap. And all over the state, there was power outages. People were trying, I mean, they had no power, they had no warmth, they're going to shelters, and people were suffering. And I recall that there was a story that Ted Cruz, when he was the senator, or he was the representative of that state, was flown, I believe he flew out of the state at the time. And people were very much against that. They were very much against Ted Cruz and everything that he was kind of saying against the crisis, because he was
Yeah,
seen
like
as the
he
biggest
flew down.
representative of the state.
Yeah,
Um,
he flew down to the Ritz-Carlton in Cancun, Mexico with his family.
yeah,
And then he
while
went
there,
and
while
then he
this
went to
whole
say that
crisis
like
was
I
going on.
did that because I'm a good father. I took them out of that crisis because I'm a good father. But by him being a great father, he also was a terrible leader. Anyway.
Yeah, and I remember in that whole situation, on the Twitterscape, which I unfortunately am a part of, there was a lot of course, bashing of Ted Cruz. And I recall that there was a tweet that seemed to have come out where Ted Cruz was saying, "Oh, well, I'll believe in climate change when Texas freezes over." And when that came out, I was like, well, Texas is freezing over, so you believe in climate change, right? So, of course, all kinds of celebrities and politicians, I believe even, but just all kinds of people were bringing up that tweet and kind of bashing about that. But turns out, I don't think even a day or two afterwards, they found out that that tweet was fake. It was just it was a tweet that was a fake screenshot of a previous one that was edited, saying that Ted Cruz said that he'll believe in climate change when Texas freezes over. The whole thing was fake. And Snopes.com, I believe, found it out really quickly. Some other sites found it really quickly. The first person who initially posted it deleted it, and you would think that, that would be that, and people would just kind of be like, oh, okay, it was false, our bad. Some news outlets I remember recall um, apologizing for it, as they did. But I remember during that kind of case, you had people say, I would go into the comments on posts reposting it or posts talking about that fake tweet, and they were saying, "Oh, well, it sucks that it's fake. I mean, but it's close enough to what he believes." People saying like, well, it's basically the same thing. He would have said it. And so with that fake message, it's to people lots of times, it didn't matter whether or not it was true or not. It was close enough. It was close to something that they believed. It went with their point of view. And I think even at the time I believed it because it would make sense. I think at that time I was not a fan of Ted Cruz, and I was thinking to myself, it sounds similar to something he would say.
Yeah.
And but at the end of the day, it was fake. It was false. Someone completely made it up for some likes and some reposts. And yet, if it went with that point of view, it sounds like something he could say. You could still believe it. People would still believe it because it didn't matter that it was true. It mattered that it was close enough. And that comes back to the whole apathy surrounding truth, in that it doesn't matter what's true or not because we all have our own little realities. We all have our own alternative facts. It just matters what my view is and kind of what agrees with that. And if something goes with your point of view, regardless of if it's true or not, you're going to take that in, and that just opens the door for so many things, for misinformation, disinformation, fake news, or any sort of external actor trying to take advantage of you and your point of view. It opens the door for all kinds of that stuff to go into your head and go into your discourse and how you talk about things, because you'll end up believing it, but you didn't check if it was true, or maybe it isn't, but it was close enough. And so, since when you have that point of view, it doesn't matter if it was true or not. You're just going to keep keep going along with that point of view, and the whole truth of whether or not it was objectively right or wrong, eh, it's just something else someone else said, and that's
Right.
really dangerous.
Yeah. Now we can do this at a later time. But um, Chad and I, we were looking through at some old and some not so old sources on this topic, and we used On Tyranny as an example. You
On
know,
Tyranny by Timothy Snyder.
yeah, exactly. The 20 lessons for from the 20th century. Basically, Snyder, for anyone that doesn't know him and anyone that didn't know the book, um, he's a Yale professor, a Yale law professor, I believe. And the book was made originally at the beginning of Trump's presidency in 2017, talking about the um, the sense of danger that the average American citizen should feel when being led by someone like Trump, and how we can avoid Americans um, from um, from becoming subjects to dictatorial power, how we can stop America from becoming a dictatorship. And to quote him, and we'll probably be quoting him a lot more later on, but just one: to abandon facts is to abandon freedom. If nothing is true, then no one can criticize power because there is no basis upon which to do so. If nothing is true, then all is spectacle. And that runs so true. That really lines up with the Trump presidency because everything was a spectacle. Everything was a reality TV show moment. That it was more fun to watch than actually to critique.
Hmm.
And so he created the term fake news so that people didn't want to critique him. You know, by making a majority or a large amount of people not believe any critique about him, you know, and by doing that, you abandon fact. And when you do that, the person that is telling the lie, in this case being Trump, he gains more and more power, and therefore you lose more and more freedom. You
Yeah,
don't have the ability to express your freedom by critiquing your authority and having an impact on your life, because your authority has almost full control over your life. And the way how America works, the president doesn't necessarily have all like full power, but the more and more that you don't care about truth, the more power they do have over your life. And when you subscribe to the idea of fake news, you get rid of every means that you have to critique your authority, and therefore having less and less freedom to have any impact on your life.
yeah. As the quote said, if there's no truth, then there's nothing you could critique power for. A government could kind of go about whatever it wants and say it does something completely false. It lies. The president lies about something. And usually it'd be up to a news source or a different politician or the people to kind of say, that's false. That's not what we stand for. That's just incorrect. But if the majority of the public, one, say, isn't sure that it's not true, they don't know really what's true, or they're just paying attention more to the reaction of it than the actual impact of it, or there is no basis of truth whatsoever. What he's saying is just what he said, and that's that. There's nothing you could do about it. You can't say that it was false and launch an investigation into, say, say it was a potentially corrupt phone call, like the first impeachment of President Trump. You couldn't launch an investigation, you couldn't impeach someone, you couldn't even say it was fake. If, what he said to him makes sense, what he says to you makes sense, but you can't even agree on whether or not it even happened, or whether or not what he said accounted for a crime or not, or what even a crime is. There's no level of agreement on that at all. There's no agreement that could be had. There's no basis that you could get anyone to even agree with you who might not agree, because if no one values the truth, no one's going to go with you when you're saying the truth.
Right. That's why those that supported the idea of fake news, calling truth fake, you know, they they at that moment they lost their ability to say to Trump that you lied. They lost their ability to critique Trump in the first impeachment. That's why so few Republicans were speaking up.
Hmm.
Partially because they were so scared of their populace voting them out because Trump was getting so powerful. You know, but he got so powerful in the first place because of lies like that. The first impeachment. Um, uh, the topic of it, I know, it was about aid
It
to
was a call to, I
aid
believe it
to
was Zelensky at the time. He was the new president
Ukraine.
of Ukraine. It was over the issue of whether or not, or I believe at the time the United States had freezed military aid to Ukraine during their ongoing war with the separatist republics in the Donbass region. This is before the war had kind of blown up, but had been ongoing for 7 or so years. The United States had freezed their annual supply or military supply to that, and President Trump had made a call to Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, asking for the Ukrainians to launch an investigation into Hunter Biden and the president's son, and his involvement with, I believe, an oil firm. And he was asking him to, I believe he said, just to do him a favor, to do that in what was not really spoken, in order to get that military aid. That was the kind of issue of that first impeachment, to
Right. And
as I
then
remember it.
the big problem was like it wasn't even necessarily to figure out if that was illegal because that's part of the reason why he was impeached because so many representatives in Congress, majority Democrat, believed that it was a breach of authority. The biggest question, this probably says the most, is that there was a question on if it actually happened. You know, like there wasn't too much of an argument of whether or not it was a breach of power, even though some made that argument. It was
It
more or
was an
less
argument.
if
It
it
was
even.
an argument. People, the word of the day back then was quid pro quo, which sometimes still tongue ties me. But
Yeah.
whether or not the president tried to overused his authority as president of the United States to get a political favor done, and whether or not that's an overreach of president power. And I believe you're right. People were debating on some of them were debating on whether or not that kind of deal was something that a president should have done. But there was a big issue on, if that's even what he did. Like, did he even ask for that? Is saying, like, would you do me a favor, or what the exact words were, is that what they're saying it is? And so people couldn't even agree on that. There wasn't that basic level of truth of what he said and how that can be interpreted that people could kind of set a basis on and kind of go from there. There was a disagreement at that very basic level because no one couldn't agree on whether or not it was true. If what he said was a quid pro quo and therefore an overreach of presidential power, they couldn't even say if what he said was that, if that qualified as that. And some people didn't even think that was even what was said in the call.
Right. Now we're approaching an hour, and Chad and I made an agreement before that we wouldn't want to go too long with each individual episode. We'll get back to this main topic, but um, that is our part one episode on our series of truth. And we think we're coming to the conclusion now that we're going to have a series on this topic. We thought we could just get this discussion, this episode done, talking about the idea of truth and why it's important, examples of it, and stuff like that, exposing problems that people may not see in everyday life and politics. We thought we could get that done in one episode, and it's becoming quite clear that we won't be able to.
We
So
would we would be going on for hours.
yeah, we already have. But yeah, this is a part one of the Truth series, and cutely named, very interestingly named, partially after our series, after our channel's name, Marshals of Truth. But yeah, we'll get back to you in part two real soon. So, Chad, if you could,
Yeah, thank you all for watching. Thank you for sticking by through this hour. It's probably the first to come, but yeah, thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, you know the deal. Yeah, thank you. Have a good one.